Let me spend the next few minutes and let me share with you something that I have been pondering on for a while, and that is the importance of relationships and why men need women and why women need men. This opinion or this perspective is something that I have been thinking about for a while, and in many ways I have been observing almost a breakdown in our relational goals and our relational muscles across people, especially in the West and in the developed West. And the more I look at modern men and the more I look at modern women and the more I compare them to the men and the women, say pre the 1950s, what you find is a huge disparity both in the quality of relationships, in the resilience in the relationships, a disparity in the ability for both parties to work together. And that puzzled me and has intrigued me. And as I've observed across both people in my social group, and as I have observed people outside of my social group, I'm observing something that I think is, in many ways, slightly sad. There was a time when, traditionally, now I know there were so many things wrong with the concepts of the traditional roles of men and women pre the 1960s. I understand that. But traditionally, if you had two couples, a man, or one couple rather, a man and a woman, two singles who come together to become a couple, there were certain roles that society expected of and from both parties. But also there were certain duties and obligations and responsibilities expected of each party. Now, I know nothing was perfect, and I know that women were not liberated at the time, and since then there's been so much more empowerment, enlightenment, education, liberation, and rightly so. So I'm not condoning what used to serve as, or what was the model from the past. What I am saying is, if you were to look at the traditional, say pre-1950s, 1960s era, what you found is that two people were codependent. They were codependent. And the codependence was not perfect. And let me say this. I know there is a school of thought that women were suppressed. And rightly so, they were. And the women are still suppressed. And rightly so, in different parts of the world, women are still suppressed. But I am speaking to modern women in the West and modern men in the West. Modern women today are more liberated, more educated, more enlightened, more empowered, wealthier than women from the pre-1950s period. However, modern women are less happy, more mentally on edge, unfulfilled. Now, I know that's a subjective view, so just stay with me here. Unfulfilled than women from the pre-1950s and the 1960s period. And the question has to be, why? Now, there is enough blame for both parties. Modern men today are more educated, empowered, celebrated, wealthier, of a better socioeconomic status than men from the pre-1950s period. And why is it that today you have more men, modern men, who have issues to do with depression, mental health issues, general health issues, a lack of sense of meaning, they lack sense of purpose, they lack structure, they lack discipline, they lack the basic prerequisite qualities that men from the pre-1950s period had. So why do we have this, almost a contrast? We seem to have everything today, but we are doing poorly in our relationships than we did pre the 1950s. And there are several reasons. I believe one of the reasons has to do with womanism, feminism, a lot of the liberal policies that came and that were put into law from the 1960s. And by liberal policies, I'm referring to policies across several sectors, both economic, social, familial. And a lot of those policies and a lot of the ideas began to, like a virus, began to degrade the foundations of what once was a stable, though not perfect, though flawed, but was a stable institution and a union. And so what I'd like to do in the few minutes that we have, perhaps, is to share what I think is some thoughts that I believe are worth just bearing in mind. One of the best things I ever heard from someone I consider to be a mentor was this. He said there was an error in the previously believed notion that if you take care of me, then I will take care of you. I believed that for a number of years, growing up as a child, even into my adulthood. And my mentor said, that is wrong. You should think about your relationship in a different way. I will take care of me for you. Now, please, would you take care of you for me? And the purpose of that statement was to say, you cannot give what you do not have. If you have two glasses, one is filled and the other is empty. The one that is empty can receive. The one that is filled will overflow. So before you look to change, it's biblical. Before you look to remove the dust from your neighbor's eye, look into your eyes and see whether you have, a plank in your eyes. Now that led me down a path where I started to recognize and realize that personal development and self-improvement was not just a necessity, it was mandatory, because you bring your head, your heart, your spirit, and your body to a relationship. So the best gift you can give anyone is a happy you, a healthy you, an empowered you, a financially stable you. By investing in yourself, now you can pour into another. And rather than looking to improve the next person, you look to improve yourself. Now let's bring this back to the context of relationships. In modern times, in today, we have socialized the West, and we've done a phenomenal job at socializing the West. But it's come at a cost. The cost is that we have become independent of each other. We're getting better in our intra relationships, but we're getting really poor at our interpersonal relationships. My mentor's recommendation about working on yourself is correct. But if you look to yourself, and if you look to become the best version of yourself, to the exclusion of being dependent on the next person, it means you rob the next person of the opportunity to serve you, to pour into you, and to be indebted to you. And that was one thing we had pre the 1960s, before all of these new ideas came into our lives. The point I'm making is the quality of your relationship would have a correlation between how much you depend on the next person. And let me say that again, because I think it's very important. I've made so many mistakes in my relationships. Like any idea, if you're not careful, it's possible for you to become almost too focused on an idea to the exclusion of any other alternative perspective. If you have a relationship with other people and you can survive without that relationship, that is a problem. Human beings are not designed to be alone. Now, one of the most beautiful parts of my learning process is a theological process of educating myself. And in reading a section in the Bible, now let me say this, the book of Genesis is in the Christian Bible, it's in the Old Testament. But the words in the Christian Bible are also in the Jewish Bible. And the same words are in the Quran. So when I refer to the book of Genesis, where it says that, and God said that it's not good for man to be alone. It's not good for man to be all in one. That is a theological statement that is recognized and accepted across 3 different religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Slightly worded differently, but the meaning and the purpose of the word are consistent. If you add the people who practice Islam and Christianity and Judaism, you have almost between 70 and 80% of the people who are believers. So this is not an insignificant group. But the point was, and the point is, that it was not good for man to be alone. We're not designed to be alone. I'm hoping that in the next few sessions that I can expand on this conversation. But let me conclude today's session by saying, I'd like you to do an audit of all of your relationships. I'd like you to make a list of all the people who are, according to your standards, in your inner circle and those in your outer circle. And here's the question to ask yourself. If you can do without that relationship, in other words, if you are completely independent of that relationship, there is something wrong. Because at the core of the issues that we face today between men and women is the fact that we are trying to become independent. We are trying to be able to live without the other. Women have been educated in the last 70 years to be independent, to be empowered, to be enlightened, not to depend on a man. I think, in my opinion, that it's become obvious that that was one of the worst ideas that we ever came up with. I genuinely believe that it's even worse than some of the ideas that came out of socialism, communism, totalitarianism, and Nazism. This is just as bad because we are starting to see the fruits of such seed. Likewise, men have been raised to think that they are supposed to dominate, rule, lord over a woman, and for their word to be law, and for them to believe that they can survive and they do not need a woman. I believe that is one of the worst ideas in the last 70 years. And in the sessions that follow, I will go into perhaps some detail of why we need each other. Each of us needs each other. But the most important part of, I hope, what would be the sessions to come will be to understand why. Why do I need you? And why do you need me? And in your personal lives, why do you need a man? And why should a man need you? Well, I hope it'll be interesting and hope it'll be useful.